The first time I walked a field that had been managed without a plow, I remember slowing down without meaning to. The soil looked different, not just darker, not just looser. It looked settled in, like it belonged to itself. When I crouched down and touched it, the surface gave a little under my fingers instead of fighting back like hardpan. It had that rich, earthy smell you get after a good rain, except this was dry ground. A farmer beside me, an Amish man with weathered hands and a calm voice, looked at me and said, "We do not try to force the soil." I have never forgotten that. Because most gardeners are taught to think of soil as something you improve by breaking it up. You till it, cultivate it, turn it over, and assume you are helping. But soil is not dead material. It is a living system. It has fungal threads running through it. It has bacteria and other tiny organisms breaking down organic matter. It has tunnels left by worms and roots that carry air and water deep into the ground. And when you run a tiller through that system, you are not just loosening dirt. You are tearing apart the structure that makes soil fertile in the first place. That is why so many Amish gardeners and farmers reject traditional tilling. They are not doing it because they are stubborn. They are doing it because they understand something a lot of modern gardeners forget. A productive garden is not built by violence. It is built by cooperation with the living ground beneath your feet. And once you understand that, a lot of common gardening mistakes start to look different. Mistake number 1 is treating soil like it is dead and disposable. That is the root of almost every other problem. When a gardener sees compacted soil, the instinct is to churn it up harder. When the bed feels tired, the instinct is to flip it over and start fresh. When weeds appear, the instinct is to go after them with machinery. It feels productive. It looks active. But in many cases, it makes things worse. Here is why. Soil has structure. It is not just a pile of particles. It has little pore spaces that hold air. It has channels that move water. It has fungal networks that connect roots to nutrients. It has earthworm tunnels that work like natural drainage lines. When you till, you shred those pathways. You also expose fresh organic matter to oxygen all at once, which can make it break down too fast. That may sound like a good thing, but in soil, it usually means you burn through the good stuff before the system has time to rebuild. And tilling does one more thing that causes a lot of grief. It brings buried weed seed up into the light. Seeds that were sleeping underground for years suddenly get the signal to wake up. Warmth, light, oxygen, disturbance. That is weed paradise. So the person who tilled to clean up the bed often ends up creating the biggest flush of weeds they have seen all season. The Amish mindset starts with a different assumption. The ground is already alive. The job is not to conquer it. The job is to support it. That means less flipping, less digging, and a lot more patience. It means building on what is already there instead of constantly tearing it apart. And that shift alone changes everything else that comes after it. Mistake number 2 is using a tiller when the problem is really shallow compaction. A lot of backyard beds do not need a full overhaul. They need oxygen. They need breathing room. They need the upper layer opened without being turned into soup. That is where the broad fork comes in, and it is one of the most useful tools you can own if you want to garden the Amish way. A broad fork looks simple. Nothing fancy, just a row of long tines and 2 handles. But it does a very specific job very well. You drive the tines into the soil and rock the handles back gently. You are not flipping the ground. You are lifting and cracking it. That loosens compacted layers so air and water can move again, but it leaves the soil horizons where they belong. That matters more than most people realize. Soil is arranged in layers. Microbes, fungi, roots, and worms tend to occupy different zones. If you mix all those layers together every year, you keep resetting the system before it can stabilize. Broad forking respects those layers while still fixing the immediate problem. The mistake people make with this tool is overdoing it. They think the harder they pry, the better the result. That is not true. If the bed is mildly compacted, a careful pass with the broad fork may be enough for the season. If the bed is badly compacted, you may need more than one pass. but you still do not want to pulverize the structure. You want loosened soil, not broken soil. This is also where the method becomes kinder to your body. If you have a bad back, sore knees, or you are simply tired of wrestling heavy equipment, broad forking is a lot easier than running a tiller across a rough bed. You work standing up. You move at your own pace. You use body weight and leverage instead of brute force. That matters when you are 60 or 70 or just plain wise enough not to beat yourself up for the sake of a garden bed. I watched an older Amish gardener in Holmes County work a tomato patch that most people would have attacked with machinery. He did not rush. He did not flip the soil. He made slow, deliberate passes with a broad fork, then left the bed alone. The next season, that soil held moisture better than the neighboring patch that had been turned hard every spring. Less noise, less effort, better ground. That is the part people miss. The soil does not always need more action. Sometimes it needs less interference. Mistake number 3 is leaving the soil bare. Bare soil is vulnerable soil. It dries out faster. It overheats faster. It erodes faster. And it invites weeds the moment the weather gives them a chance. If you walk through a garden that has been left exposed, the surface often gets crusty and tight. Rain pounds it. Sun bakes it. Wind strips away fine particles. Over time, the top layer gets weaker instead of stronger. Amish gardeners understand this instinctively. They keep the soil covered whenever possible. And one of the biggest parts of that system is deep mulching. A proper mulch layer does several jobs at once. It shades the ground so moisture stays in the bed longer. It blocks light from weed seeds. It softens the impact of heavy rain. It moderates soil temperature. And as it breaks down, it becomes part of the soil itself. In other words, mulch is not just a cover, it is future topsoil. The thickness matters. You want enough mulch to suppress weeds and protect the ground, but not so much that you suffocate the plants. A layer around 4 to 6 inches is a practical starting point for most vegetable beds. Straw, shredded leaves, clean wood chips, and chopped corn stalks can all work, depending on what you are growing and what is available in your area. Around annual vegetables, I prefer straw or leaves. Around permanent paths or fruit trees, wood chips can be excellent. The budget version is often the best version. If you have leaves in the fall, you may already have the cheapest mulch you will ever find. Run them over with the mower if they are too whole, and spread them thick. If you can get clean straw from a local farm, that is another solid option. The point is not to buy an expensive product just to feel modern. The point is to keep living soil covered. Here is the part that surprises people. Mulch does not just help the plants above ground, it helps the whole ecosystem under it. Under a good mulch layer, the soil stays cooler in summer, more stable in cold weather, and far friendlier to worms and microbes. That stability is what living soil wants. It is one of the simplest ways to make the ground work with you instead of against you. Mistake number 4 is burying compost when you should be feeding the surface. A lot of gardeners were taught to dig compost into the bed as if they were mixing dough. But that is not how nature usually works. In a forest, leaves fall on top. Plants die back on top. Rain carries nutrients downward. Worms pull material deeper. Fungi move carbon through the root zone. The whole system feeds from above and grows downward. That is why Amish soil care usually favors top dressing. They spread compost on the surface instead of constantly burying it. Then they let rain, worms, and biology do the work of moving that nourishment where it belongs. This is one of those habits that feels too simple until you understand the mechanism. When you keep compost on top, you protect the underground structure. You do not rip open the soil every time you want to add fertility. You keep feeding the life that is already there. And the life in the soil does the mixing for you. The mistake people make is being impatient. They assume compost only works if roots are planted directly into it. That is not how root systems behave. Roots respond to moisture, microbial activity, and gradual nutrient movement. A thin layer of finished compost on top can help far more than a hard digging session that destroys what is already working. If your soil is tired, 1 inch of finished compost spread over the bed can make a real difference. If the bed is especially hungry, add another light layer later in the season and cover it with mulch. That is slow food for the soil. And soil, like most living systems, usually prefers slow food. There is another practical benefit here too. Your back and knees get a break. No deep digging. No turning heavy clay. No crouching over a bed for an hour trying to work in every scoop. A long-handled rake and a garden cart can do a lot of the labor while you stay upright. For a lot of older gardeners, that is not a small detail. That is the difference between keeping a garden and giving it up. Mistake number 5 is letting the ground sit empty in the off-season. This one is easy to miss because the harvest season makes people think the garden is done. The tomatoes come out, the beans finish, the squash slows down, and then the bed sits there, bare and exposed, until spring. But in the Amish approach, empty ground is wasted ground. That is where cover crops come in. Cover crops, or green manures, are plants you grow not for the table, but for the soil. Clover, rye, and radish are 3 common examples. They keep roots in the ground when the bed would otherwise be idle. Those living roots feed the biology below the surface. They reduce erosion. They help hold nutrients in place. They improve soil structure over time. And some of them, especially clover, can help add nitrogen to the system. Rye is excellent for building root mass and protecting the soil through cold weather. Clover is useful for feeding soil biology and adding fertility. Radish can help break up compacted zones and leave behind channels when it decomposes. The point is not to harvest these plants like a summer crop. The point is to keep the soil active when you are not growing vegetables. The mistake gardeners make is waiting too long to seed them. By the time the first hard frost arrives, it may already be too late for decent establishment. Timing depends on your USDA zone, but the rule is simple. Do not leave the bed bare if you can help it. Seed early enough for the cover crop to root in before real cold sets in. In milder zones, you have a longer window. In northern zones, you need to move sooner than you think. If you only have a small plot, you can still do this. Even a short strip or half a bed is better than nothing. And if a full cover crop is not practical, a thick layer of chopped leaves is still far better than bare soil. Imperfect is fine. Exposed and empty is what you want to avoid. Mistake number 6 is assuming the soil must be finished before you plant. That mindset causes a lot of frustration. People want the bed perfect before they trust it. They want every clump broken, every weed gone, every inch of compost worked in, every layer corrected before a seed ever touches the ground. So they keep disturbing the soil while they wait for ideal conditions. But the Amish approach is more patient than that. They know soil improves over time when you stop injuring it and start feeding it correctly. This is where sheet mulching becomes one of the best no-till methods you can use. Some people call it lasagna gardening, and that name makes sense because you are layering materials instead of digging. If you want to build a new bed without turning the ground over, this is one of the cleanest ways to do it. You start by mowing or flattening the grass as low as you can. Then you lay cardboard over the area, overlapping the edges so weeds cannot sneak through the cracks. Wet it down so it stays in place and starts softening. On top of that, add compost, then add mulch. Over time, the cardboard breaks down, the turf underneath weakens, and worms, fungi, and microbes turn the whole thing into rich planting soil. People often think this sounds too easy. That usually means it is a good idea. The catch is only time. You are not forcing the bed into shape in a weekend. You are building conditions that let biology do the work for you. And there is a real practical payoff. If you do this in fall, the bed can be transformed by spring. If you do it in spring, you may be able to plant later in the season, depending on your climate and the materials you use. The key is not speed. The key is cooperation with the soil life already on site. One caution here. Use plain cardboard, not shiny or heavily coated material. Water it well. Overlap the seams. And be patient with the breakdown. A good sheet-mulched bed often looks ordinary at first. Then one day you pull back the top layer, and find that the ground underneath has become dark, loose, and full of worms. That is how living soil announces itself. Mistake number 7 is expecting the method to look dramatic right away. This is the one that trips up impatient gardeners. Tilling gives you instant visual change. The bed looks different the same day. It feels active, almost heroic. But that dramatic change is often temporary. The structure collapses again. Weeds rush in. Moisture escapes. The soil tires out faster. It looks impressive first and costs you later. The Amish method is different. At first, it can look almost too simple. A layer of mulch, a light top dressing of compost, a broad fork pass, a cover crop, a sheet-mulched bed with cardboard and leaves. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, no big machine tearing through the ground. If you are the kind of person who wants instant proof, it can be tempting to dismiss it, but that is where the real payoff lives. The first season might not look dramatic if you are only judging by bare dirt. The second season starts to tell the truth. The soil holds water better. The weed pressure drops. The roots run deeper. The bed holds together in heavy rain, instead of sealing over or washing away. And by the third year, the difference is hard to ignore. The soil starts behaving like a system instead of a substance. I have seen older gardeners, especially people who cannot spend all day on their knees, fall in love with this method for one simple reason. It saves labor in the right places. Less tilling, less watering, less weeding, less fighting crusty soil after every storm, less bending, less damage to the bed. That is not laziness, that is just good sense. And here is the part I wish every new gardener understood. You do not have to make the soil perfect all at once. The soil gets better because you stop punishing it and start building it. That is a slower process, but it is a better one. Let me pull these pieces together, because they are all part of one system. Deep mulch protects the surface and feeds the soil as it breaks down. The broad fork loosens compaction without destroying the underground structure. Compost spread on top feeds the bed from above the way nature does. Cover crops keep living roots in the ground when the bed would otherwise be empty. And sheet mulching lets you build new beds without turning the soil over at all. That is the Amish logic in plain English. Do less harm. Feed the biology. Protect the surface. Keep roots in the ground. Let the worms, rain, fungi, and microbes take over the work that heavy equipment usually tries to do. And when that system gets going, the garden starts to look different in ways you can feel before you can even measure them. The soil smells richer. It crumbles instead of clumping. Water disappears into it instead of running off. Weeds become easier to manage because the surface is covered and the bed is stable. The plants stop acting like they are fighting for every inch of life. One of my favorite sites is a bed in midsummer that used to crack open and bake hard, but now stays dark under mulch and soft underneath. Pull back a little of the cover and you will see worms working the soil like they own the place. That is not a bad sign. That is the best sign there is. It means the ground is alive and doing the work it was designed to do. So if you remember only one thing from all of this, remember this. Good soil care is not about force. It is about stewardship. Stop breaking the living structure, and the living structure starts helping you back. If you want the next step after this, the natural follow-up is how to build a no-till bed from the ground up, or how to choose the right cover crop for your zone and season. Once you see a living bed come to life, it gets hard to go back to the old habit of ripping everything apart every spring.